You have to adapt to what's going on in this particular environment. The pig has an immune system somewhat similar to ours. It can go directly from the duck to us or through some mixing bowl. And then it starts to spread between us. Okay? So let's look at what took place and how rapidly this spread. This is the H1N1 outbreak of 2009 that supposedly began in Mexico and was mislabeled swine flu. I think it's a bad practice to name any virus after either an animal or a place. You think people want to be, you think Bogotá would be thrilled to be the home of the Bogotá virus? I don't think so. So here it is, April. This is June. It doesn't take long for these viruses to spread globally. Okay? Very quickly. And almost impossible to stop. Now, if H1N1 had the same mortality as H5N1, I would say half of this room wouldn't be here, because that's how high the mortality would be. Well, in Egypt they decided, well, somebody called this the swine flu, let's get rid of all of the pigs. The pigs, in fact, were raised by the Coptic Christians. The majority of people in Egypt are Muslim. Muslims don't like pork too much. So this was not only a misguided strategy to get rid of the virus, it was also politically and ethnically part of that. Politics and ethnicity and religion also became part of the strategy. Of course, they found out that once they killed all the pigs, they lost their garbage collection system. Because then they didn't have enough goats to eat all the garbage, which is what the pigs used to do. So the pig raisers would take their pigs out to the garbage dumps. Pigs would eat that. They'd go back, kill the pigs, sell the pork to those people who were pork eaters. We'll come to that again. I'm going to talk a little bit about bats and the spread of new and emerging diseases. This is a fruit bat, and they eat fruit. They have a wingspan about like this. So in the evening time, when the bats go out to hunt for insects or to go to fruit trees and so on, you'll see them flapping across. I don't know whether you have them here in Colombia, they're all over the world. Bats, huge bats, which of course are no danger unless somehow they carry a virus that can infect us. Now, why bats? Why are bats so much involved in this? That's a whole other issue. But let me tell you just one story. This is a story of a disease called Nipah virus, named after a town in Malaysia called Nipah. And what was happening is that there was a number of workers, about 250 workers, who were in the abattoirs, the slaughterhouses, for pigs. Now Malaysia is about 70% Muslim and 30% Chinese. Chinese are, of course, pork eaters. And Malaysia was a major exporter of pork to Singapore, to China, and elsewhere. They couldn't figure out where was this, and finally they put the story together. That what was happening was that these fruit bats were feeding on the fruit of trees that had been placed in the farms where the pigs were being raised to protect them against the sun. Pigs don't sweat very well, which is why they wallow in the water. These, clearly, the urine or the feces of the bats carry this virus. This virus, then, the fruit then dropped down, the pigs ate the fruit. In eating the fruit, they created this aerosol spray. They developed a pneumonia. So the virus now becomes amplified. They then are taken to the slaughterhouse, and the pigs cough in the face of the workers. The workers develop the pneumonia and die. This is a highly lethal virus. 40% mortality, 50% mortality. Okay? So from a few bats, coming down, affecting some pigs, and by the way, what happens when you have sick pigs? You start taking it to other markets, right? So we become the spreader of the condition. The pigs are spreading it amongst themselves, and we take the sick pigs to other markets, and those pigs start to infect other pigs. And pretty soon you've gone from one to many. And how did they get rid of it? Well, they got rid of it by killing all the pigs. Couldn't kill the bats, obviously. But they killed the pigs. Now, it's one thing to kill a lot of chickens, about this big. Killing a lot of pigs is a lot. Now, today, Malaysia, which once had a very vigorous export business, there are no more pig farms in Malaysia. Wiped them out. Okay? This is the Ebola virus. And Ebola was in Africa back in 1976 for the first cases. I remember because I had a project in the southern Sudan. And we were screened when we got to London. They didn't know it was Ebola, but the first early cases came from right here. And I remember going back to London, and they said there's this new thing that's killing people. We don't know what it is. Do you have a fever? You know, that's the only thing they ever ask you at the airport. Do you have a fever, right? And then suddenly it appears in West Africa. Now the West Africans are not used to this. They've never seen anything like this before. Okay? And it starts to kill people. Forget all these numbers on the side, except to say that the outbreak in West Africa had as many cases and many more deaths than all of the other outbreaks combined. Why? Why did that happen? Why should this outbreak in Western Africa, which then caused the whole world to get, I'm sure that some of you had things in your hospital. What to do if an Ebola patient shows up? How should we deal with it? What's the chance of it spreading? And so on and so on. About 11,000 people died. People who were treating patients who had what they thought was Ebola were wearing all these kind of fancy suits. And you can't wear these suits for more than about 40 minutes because it's so hot inside and so on. These are very difficult. Okay, these are people who were collecting bodies, working in hospitals, and so on. But the culture was very much about performing your duty to somebody in your family who has died. That your duty as a survivor was to help escort the person to the next world. Now somebody comes along and says, you can't do that anymore. You give the body to us, we'll put it in the ground. I said, but this is my mother, this is my father. He said, we don't care. That's the way the epidemic has to be contained. So what do people do? Well, many of them did what they did with the chickens. They just don't tell you. Because if you're going to prevent me from doing my duty, my sacred duty, so this became an issue. So there were differences. In Central Africa, most of the epidemics burned out after a few hundred cases. West Africa, that didn't happen. Why? Well, first of all, it was much quicker to go from rural to urban. Many of these other outbreaks, the rural communities were quite isolated. So the epidemic would come into the village, burn itself out, and that was the end of it. Here you had roads connecting rural to urban. So it got into Monrovia and other large cities in West Africa. We always thought that this was a hemorrhagic disease. That is, people would bleed from their nose, from their eyes, from their gut. But it appeared differently here. There was some hemorrhaging, but lots of these people had diarrheal disease. Why was there this difference? We don't know. But one thing we can do with this now is we can follow these patients. And it turns out that many of them carry the virus, even if they survive. Mortality here is 50%, 60%. We found the virus in the eye. We have found the virus in the spinal fluid. So some of these conditions don't disappear when you get better. In fact, you can still carry the virus, which has all sorts of public health implications about theirs. There are lots of differences here. The characteristics of the population, the age structure Population density. Is the mosquito present? Well, Bogotá doesn't have to worry about this. So it's in certain areas of the country that are more susceptible. Past social and immunologic experience. We still don't know the relationship between the Zika virus and dengue, for example. Still being worked out. Chikungunya. The level of medical and public health infrastructure. How good is it? Is it better here in Colombia? Do you have greater access to public health interventions, to diagnostic interventions? Okay, so here's the same virus, spread by the same mosquito, but appearing very differently in two parts of Latin America, where the viruses come within 6 months to a year. And then cultural practices. What are they? And how do they differ from one place to another? You're familiar with this lady, this female Aedes aegypti. You can tell from the white banding on her legs. And of course, she's the one who's getting the blood in. And of course, the great tragedy of Zika. A horrible tragedy. It's a tragedy that I don't think any of us can fully appreciate. This is not a one-off situation. This is what these families must face for the rest of their life. Okay? And that's the most severe form of it. Again, we don't know all the learning difficulties and disabilities that might occur when these cases eventually get into 5, 6, 7-year-old. This is simply to point out that most of the new and emerging diseases that we will see in the world today are zoonotic diseases. That is, they are spreading from animals to man. From animals to humans. Pigs, ducks, chickens, apes. And it's related to our interaction with these and the effectiveness of these viruses in adapting to our immune system. H5N1 did not. H1N1 did. These are extremely expensive. It is not simply a matter of morbidity and mortality in humans. In Bangladesh, Nipah has led to maybe 250 deaths. In Malaysia, about 250 deaths. Across Malaysia, it killed their whole pork industry. $540 million. BSE, bovine spongiform encephalitis, or mad cow disease, had a devastating impact on the cattle industry in Great Britain. By the way, this was caused, probably, by feeding cows parts of sheep. That is, they turned the poor cows into carnivores, and the sheep, which carried something called scrapie, or a prion-related disease, infected the cattle. H5N1, H1N1, who knows? Billions of dollars lost in trade, in tourism, in healthcare. So the cost to the health system may be only a fraction of the total cost of any of these conditions. And there are other examples of that. Zika, I haven't put that. This is H1N1 in Mexico during the tourist season in Acapulco. We have, in many parts of the world, inadequate infrastructure for water and sanitation. Now, I'm sure Colombia is far better off than India and Bangladesh, which is where I do a lot of my work. But where you have inadequate water and sanitation, you again increase the risk of spread. India has the largest amount of open defecation in the world. Leads to contamination of water supplies and so on. People travel now through tourism and through internal migration, either purposefully or they're pushed off their land. This has certainly been an issue here in Colombia. And it's an issue in many parts, Syria, so on and so on. This leads to a vast movement of people. Centralized food production. When you go to the market today, you don't know where your things are coming from. It doesn't say, this is from Richard Cash's farm in Bogotá. You have no idea. You're having a much more efficient production of food, but if food gets contaminated at a central source, it can spread much easier, as we know. Antibiotic and drug misuse. I'll say a few words about this when I talk about TB. We may overuse drugs. We may underuse treatment, that is, we treat for 1 day rather than 5 days. People may not comply. They say, here, take this.